Welcome to the global discussion. Today, I want to talk a little bit about storytelling and why storytelling is changing how companies compete. There's been a new research report put out by a good friend of mine, Elliot Rayner, and he's examining storytelling across leadership roles in many companies. And the companies that he's looked at include Google, they include OpenAI, Anthropic, Amazon, Nike, Miro, and many others. And what Elliot's identified is something that extends well beyond marketing, I think. And rather than analyzing industry commentary or aggregating existing research that's already out there, his study is examining live job descriptions published by employers in 2026. And it's fairly recent, this report, and it looks across organizations operating, which I find interesting, in 21 different industries. So, a remarkably consistent pattern has somewhat emerged when you look at it. Companies seem to be creating more awareness and a need for senior leadership positions, and one with maybe a central responsibility, and that's to define the narrative the organization should own, to maybe align the business around that and to make it consistent across every customer interaction. Easy to say, probably harder to do. Now, some companies they hire what's now termed a head of storytelling. Others are advertising for things like a vice president of brand and narrative marketing, a head of strategic positioning, if you will, or even just a narrative lead. There's many different positions. However, reporting lines are a little bit blurry with some of these roles sitting obviously under marketing. And of course, chief revenue officers are interested in this too, as well as other executive functions, of course. But despite any differences, the brief, I think, is strikingly similar across these companies. They're not just content leadership roles, they're roles created to solve a growing strategic problem. And I think that problem is that many businesses operate across an expanding number of products, audiences, channels, and of course, markets. The product portfolios are evolving continuously. AI capabilities change rapidly, and organizations communicate through far more touch points than they did even 5 years ago. And I think every department, to some degree, is developing its own language that is kind of reflecting their own priorities. Product teams might describe technical capability, sales maybe emphasize commercial value. And I suppose, if you've got investor relations, they focus on market opportunities. But customer success highlights implementation outcomes, and marketing attempts to maybe connect all of those things and connect each of those perspectives into a coherent story. But the problem is that's often after they've already maybe diverged. So the result is simply inconsistent messaging in that case. And it is organizational fragmentation at its finest. Customers experience a single company while internally multiple versions of that company story compete for attention. And as businesses become more complex, maintaining a shared narrative, it's becoming increasingly difficult, and the commercial consequences become much more significant. One of the report's most important findings, I think, is that it's not confined to technology companies. Research identifies storytelling roles across 21 industries, and those are including healthcare, financial services, robotics, manufacturing, enterprise software, consumer products, government tech, and even sports. So while AI, artificial intelligence companies feature prominently, the pattern itself is considerably broader. Complexity rather than industry appears to be the common driver. And Elliot's research also challenges common assumptions about the capabilities organizations are seeking. The expectation might be that storytelling leaders are primarily creative specialists responsible for producing compelling campaigns or memorable brand narratives. But the recurring requirement across these analysed job descriptions is more editorial judgment. And organizations, companies consistently seek leaders capable of deciding which messages matter and aligning multiple stakeholders around this common narrative while maintaining consistency across all the functions. So the emphasis is on strategic judgment rather than serving as an output generated after strategic decisions have been made. Storytelling increasingly appears to function as infrastructure that supports those decisions. The role is less concerned with producing, let's say, individual pieces of content and more with creating the operating system through which the products, strategy, and commercial priorities are understood by employees, customers, and investors. The seniority attached to these positions is somewhat reinforcing that interpretation. And according to the report, salaries are ranging from about $139,000, $140,000 up to about $400,000 per year. And while every role listing requires 10 or more years of experience, the individual examples are reinforcing this broader pattern. Google's role, for example, is focusing on strategic positioning that shapes market perception rather than just on campaign execution. OpenAI, on the other hand, combines storytelling with AI experimentation and executive innovation. Amazon's position centers on building narrative systems that support the senior leadership communication, obviously globally. Miro consolidates multiple communication functions under a single storytelling leader who maintains consistency across channels, while Vanta explicitly connects storytelling with AI discovery and generative search visibility, recognizing that narrative increasingly is influencing how organizations and companies are understood by both people and, I suppose, machines at this stage. So perhaps the most interesting implication concerns AI itself. Rather than reducing the importance of storytelling, AI appears to increase its strategic value. Content production certainly becoming faster, cheaper, more accessible than ever before, and the constraint is no longer just generating words, presentations, or campaigns. The constraint is creating a coherent narrative that remains consistent as content volumes expand across every channel. So in that environment, competitive advantage shifts from production more towards that judgment I was speaking about, and certainly towards alignment and clarity. As businesses become increasingly complex, the leadership teams are recognizing that fragmented narratives create commercial friction. Customers struggle to understand value propositions, employees communicate inconsistently, and strategic priorities become diluted across functions. That might sound a little familiar to some people. The companies that are creating these roles appear to be responding by assigning clear ownership for narrative itself. Now, whether this responsibility ultimately falls to marketing, the report makes clear that multiple sectors are independently arriving at the same conclusion. Storytelling is certainly a strategic driver for translating organizational complexity into clear market understanding. And that may prove to be one of the more important shifts in focus over the coming decade. Now, if you're interested in finding out more, there's some great research. It's by Elliot Rayner, and I'll put the link in the comments below.